The history of Egypt, of Moses, of the Exodus is something you need to know about. And here to talk about that fact with us today, the fact of Egyptian history and its interplay, and its interplay basically with biblical history and biblical events, author, filmmaker, Timothy Mahoney. Tim, good to have you back again with us. On our last program with you, we laid out a kind of a general pattern of the history of Egypt and why it's important to know about it and to know the truth of it. Today we're going to expand on that and move into the Holy Land and talk about Joshua coming in to the city of Jericho. But before that, let's talk about Egyptian history once again. For those who didn't get to hear you talk on our first program, let's talk about the way Egyptian history is looked at by archaeologists.
Well, you know, when it all began, there's very popular software now called Rosetta Stone, and it comes from this idea of taking language and understanding it. And there was a real Rosetta Stone at one time, and it was fought over. The British and the French fought for it. And a man by the name of Champollion, who was a genius in languages, was able to crack the code of the Rosetta Stone. And that had Greek, I believe, and two forms of hieroglyphs. Mm-hmm. And he figured it out. And when he figured it out, he went then to Egypt. And he went to places like Karnak and Luxor and different areas where there were tombs and temples. And he read the hieroglyphs on the walls. And he saw something in the very, very beginning. He saw an area in a temple, and I've been there myself with Egyptologist David Roll, and we were looking at it, and it talked about a campaign. And you know, the Bible talks about campaigns from Egypt, or putting your trust in Egypt, or don't go to Egypt, and there's this constant story of Abraham went to Egypt, Joseph and Jacob went to Egypt, Jesus and Joseph and Mary went to Egypt.
Right.
Constant going back and forth, back and forth. And so this relationship with this superpower was there. And Champollion read that it looked as if there was a military campaign, and he saw what he believed was, I think it was Jerusalem. He saw these cities up in this area, and he was just new at learning the language of the hieroglyphs. And he then sort of came with an idea that was the time. He saw a name in the Bible, and the name in the Bible was Shishak, and I think the name on the wall was Shoshank, and he thought that those two characters were the same. And from kind of that ended up sort of getting a place where the history of ancient Egypt and the Bible started to align themselves. Mm-hmm. But what we found out later was that, and this is Egyptologist David Roll's work, was that he points out that was a misinterpretation, and the campaigns weren't the same. And in the book, we talk about that. We talk about that happened, but a great consequence happened because of that. Because then, when you start looking for events, you cannot get them to synchronize. And what David says is that the Bible was used to date Egypt, and then Egypt was used to discredit the Bible.
Aha. Now, you've done a marvelous thing with your DVD, Patterns of Evidence. We'll talk more about this later. In fact, I'm holding the multiple DVD set, and it's entitled Patterns of Evidence because what Tim has done is lay out what he calls the wall of time, and he places key markers on that wall. And he looks at Egypt, and by the way, we should talk about the fact that historians speak of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt and the New Kingdom. There's kind of a gap between them, and the gap is sort of a mystery in a way.
Yes.
And you've attacked that mystery, I think, successfully.
Yes, we're going to put up a graphic here. You know, you're going to see I had to understand when I was talking with Egyptologists, what in the world are they talking about? They said the Old Kingdom. Well, the Old Kingdom is when the Great Pyramid was built.
Yeah.
Then there's a bit of a gap. It's called the First Intermediate Period. I call it the First Dark Period. And then there's called the Middle Kingdom, and that's another period of history, which was known, I think, for art and poetry. And then there's a gap, and then the following kingdom is the New Kingdom. So you have old, middle, and new. And between the middle and the new is about 1,000 years. So something happened in Egypt's history within 1,000 years that actually caused a collapse.
And what was the something?
Well, that's what people there's a mystery about that. But there's also, and what this film and what from the interviews that I've conducted with archaeologists, is that they're looking at that gap, that fall of Egypt, as the time when the Exodus happened right before it. It caused Egypt to crumble. And even we have documents that actually talk about that God actually doesn't say the gods, it says God smote the Egyptians. An Egyptian historian said that. And it caused a vacuum that then another race of people came in and took charge for a while. And you know what's so interesting is that gap also happened in Canaan. So something happened in Egypt and something happened in the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is the ancient Israel, the land where the Israelites came in and conquered that area, the Canaanites, the Philistines. Something happened there where all the cities that were there, a number of them were burned or destroyed. So we know that there was an exodus, a destruction in Egypt, the Bible says, and then there was this event after 40 years of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. They came in to this land, and there was they went to these different cities and attacked them and took them over.
Now, you may have read the Bible. Excuse me. You may have read the Bible, and you've got you think, a pretty good idea, a pretty good grasp of Old Testament history. I guarantee you, after you've seen this DVD produced by Tim, you'll realize you don't have as much of a grasp as you think you did, because there's a kind of a cloudy period in secular history. And academics out there are saying, well, the Bible simply doesn't match up with what we're seeing in Egypt and in the Middle East.
Well, remember when I told you about Champollion?
Yeah.
So what I'm going to suggest to you, and what I was, I'm a filmmaker, by the way. I'm not a historian or an Egyptologist or anything, but I've spent 12 years researching and understanding this. What we find, and what Egyptologists like David Rohl has said, is that Champollion got it wrong, and that he picked the wrong guy. And it's like these cups. If you think this character is this character, and you move them together, but they're not the same characters, then they're actually over like this, then you've just pulled one history over the top of another. But what if that idea is wrong? But no one's changed it. You see, it stayed the same.
Stayed the same.
And I tell you what, in any kind of science, engineering or electronics or nuclear information, the science is constantly reevaluating itself, and what they thought was true at one time, now they come up with something different, and it changes the whole world. Well, I can tell you that ancient history doesn't change very easily. People aren't necessarily willing to change those ideas. But this is what the film is talking about and uncovering. And what we have found then, we said, okay, all right, let's just take a step back here. Let's look at what does the pattern look like. Because there's different ways to approach it. And once we had the wall of time, and we could start looking for the pattern. And if we talk about Jericho, for example, the question, because we show in the series, in the investigation, that there's all these events that the Bible talks about. Can we find them? Can we find them in the right sequence?
That's the question, the right sequence. And let's put it this way, just as simply as I can think of a way to put it, the children of Israel wandered for 40 years, and they came into the Holy Land at some time. Let's just call it time X.
Right,
we
right.
just don't know. Let's say we don't know when they came into the Holy Land, and let's say that we try to backdate the time they left Egypt and then run the clock forward to the time they entered into the Holy Land, and we can put together some history. But if any of those timings are wrong, then you have a lack of agreement. You have people saying, well, there's not enough history to really know the truth here. And so you have a lot of dispute about true history. And that's where you come in.
Well, myself with a load of other people that have been looking at it, and what we find is that the Bible does actually have a time that it gives. It says that from the time of the temple back, there is a particular time period that they look at. And what we see is that, so we do know that there's the Bible is fairly specific about when things were supposed to happen. The tricky part comes with matching that with other parts of ancient history. And so when we talked about Ramesses, because the Bible references Ramesses as the pharaoh, that the Israelites were building his cities. Now what's so interesting is, I'm going to give you another little clue here. The Bible says that they were building the cities of Ramesses and Pithom when Moses was born. Okay? Then it says that Moses grew up in this household, and then he kills the Egyptian and he flees. And then it says, eventually later on, the Pharaoh dies. So then who is the Pharaoh? Is it Ramesses was the city that was building, and he dies, then it can't be Ramses in the first place. Because there's a new Pharaoh, right? And he comes back. So those are all those little tricks. So we started to think about all those little questions or challenges. We started realizing that maybe it's not Ramesses they're talking about, maybe it's the location. It's the location of Ramesses, because underneath the city of Ramesses is an older city. And what this film is exploring is the fact that we think, through the scholars that I've talked to and the pattern of evidence that shows up, it's earlier in Egypt's time period. It's actually earlier in the time period going this way. It's in the Middle Kingdom. And that's what this film is exploring. And basically saying is, there is evidence here that you need to know about. You and your family need to know about it. Because when your children go off to school and go off to college and your grandchildren grow up, and they're hearing there's no evidence for the Bible, and they're going, wait a minute, Ma, Pop, what you believe, I don't believe, because my teacher is a lot smarter than you, says there's no evidence for this. You basically have something like this and say, hold on there, Sonny, let me show you something. And that's why this is so powerful, because we listen to both sides, we listen to the different viewpoints, and we let the people who say there's no evidence have their say. And then we start showing this pattern, and it's pretty hard to deal with because it's so powerful. And that's basically what happens. And then we move to the story, for example, of Jericho. We wanted to talk about that today. That people said, well, there's no evidence for people at the time of Jericho, because during the time of Ramesses, we don't see that Jericho was destroyed. There was no city there.
Right.
And so the question then is what's going on? Is the Bible wrong, or is the archaeology wrong?
Right, and you have to synchronize what happened in Egypt with what happened in the Holy Land.
Right.
And archaeologists have either A, not particularly wanted to do that, or B, had their own biases that kept them from doing it. And you may be thinking, well, wow, this is way over my head, and it sounds boring to me. I guarantee you, when you look at patterns of evidence in the DVD or the Blu-ray version, this is what I call a popcorn cruncher. You're going to be sitting there just saying, wow, this is fascinating. And when the first hour ends and you take your little break and come back, you're not going to want to quit, because what Tim has done, and Tim is a great filmmaker, and a good filmmaker is able to keep your attention. A noted authority says this, another authority says this. Tim interviews them both. He takes them to the scene. The camera is set up in Egypt. You can see the stele with the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and it's literally an adventure film.
Yeah, it is. It's really, what I'm going to do is take you on my 12-year journey and basically allow people to go with me. And one of the things that people might not know about is that we got the actual, dig site plans, right where the size of the city was. We rebuilt Jericho, the absolute footprint, according to what the archaeologists dug up. So when you're looking at Jericho, we've placed Jericho exactly in the valley, because we've got the maps, and we've rebuilt it exactly. So when you're looking at it, you might be seeing what the Joshua and the Israelites saw. You're going to basically see this city in its context. Exactly. We've done that with the city of Avaris as well. So I try to do, and to tell the story, we actually do recreations. We actually show the wall, coming down.
Right.
And so you're hearing the Bible story, And then we're saying, can we find evidence for this? And what people are going to see in this series and in the book is a pattern of evidence for all of these different areas, even the story of Rahab, for example.
That was excellent, by the way. Let's talk about Jericho, because there was the wilderness. Now, I believe, and I know you believe, that around 1450 BC, the Egyptians left.
The Israelites.
Thank you. The Israelites left Egypt. And when they did, a clock started ticking.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of finished ticking when they crossed the Jordan River and came into the Promised Land. And you have just, I think, nailed the when and the why and the where. And then you've done some marvelous digging in history so that we can actually see the city of Jericho as it was first excavated back in the 19th century. And tell us that story.
Well, in the 19th century, I think it was right around World War II, a German went there, Ernst Zellen. And Ernst Zellen was one of the first, and then he was followed by a British person, by two British. One was Garstang, and another one was Kathleen Kenyon. Mm-hmm. Now, Zellen and Garstang both felt that they had found a city that was matching the biblical time period and matching the Bible.
Yeah.
And what was also very interesting, I kept hearing about the Germans, and like in my own kind of detective approach, kept hearing about the Germans. And it wasn't until later with Bryant Wood, we started telling me about this house that the Germans found. And we'll talk about that in just a second. What's interesting is that the Bible says that the walls fell all around the story. You know, the story is that this person, Rahab, had hid these Israelite spies. And she had heard about God and these people, and the whole city was terrified. Mm-hmm. And she hid them, and she says, I want you to protect my family. And she was to do that, and they promised her. She put a cord out the window. Well, what Brian Wood told me was that when Garstang dug up this area, what he found was that one portion of the wall on the northern side did not fall, that the house was in the wall, exactly as it had been told in the Bible. The rest of the area had collapsed, but not this one area. So once again, matching the story of Jericho. And later on, we find that when Kenyon and Garstang also dug it, they saw that the walls had fallen down as if, and then there was a fire. So we do know that when the walls fell down, one portion of the city did not fall. The walls fell down, and it made a ramp so that you could actually run up into the city. And then the city was set on fire. That's what Kathleen Kenyon said, was that the city was set on fire. And this matches exactly what the story of the Bible.
Yeah, so the Israelite journey, I guess the point that hit me in this, the Israelite journey is a documentary with time markers that all make sense.
Yes.
Once you know what you're looking at. The Exodus, the wilderness march, the entry into the Promised Land, and then the things that were happening in the Promised Land all fit together and give us a timeline that a lot of people say really doesn't exist. I suppose there's still some doubt out there about this timeline, right?
Oh yeah, this is controversial, absolutely. But it makes too much sense, and that's the reason why I had asked the question as a filmmaker, was I going to bring this up? And you know what? It makes so much sense. And if people are open to looking at it. And so I thought, let's take the Bible on. Let's allow the Bible to be tested. And that's what we've done. And I was afraid in the beginning that, I don't want to hurt my own faith or others. But what came out of this was that when you listen to the different viewpoints and you see what the Bible is saying, and when you are open to listening to this, that's the reason why it's so powerful, is because people are getting something they've never heard before. And there's a whole new breakthrough that there is a pattern of evidence that matches these stories. And it's testifying to the historical nature of God acting in history.
So, to put this all together, what we have is a mystery story. In fact, as I watched your DVD, And by the way, it's either Blu-ray or DVD, your choice. And we'll talk about that when we talk about this set called Patterns of Evidence. As I watched this thing, more and more I wasn't looking at something about the Bible as much as I was watching a great mystery story that has all the attributes of a good, everybody loves a mystery. You know, something happens and you don't know exactly why it happened, and so you bring in 2 or 3 characters and they try to figure out why things happened in the sequence that they did, and that leads them to something else. And that's exactly what happens in your DVD, and I love it. It's hard to convey that just sitting here and telling people what they're going to be seeing, but that's what is so attractive about this DVD to me.
Right, it is a bit of a Sherlock Holmes uncovering of things, because I traveled so much. I went over to Europe many, many times. I was in Israel 5 or 6 times, Egypt twice, went to the Sinai. So there's just a lot of going back and forth because I didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't sure if there was going to be, 12 years, a lot of people thought, hey, this is taking a long time. Or do you really even have a film to be made here? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until the last several years when we started to understand, because I get information years earlier and I didn't know what it meant. I had information about Rahab, and I had the book. I got the book in Jerusalem probably 4 or 5 years earlier, and I didn't know what I had. You see, I think there's a lot of times we have information, we just don't know how it fits the puzzle.
And in this DVD, you can actually see that section of the wall that didn't fall.
Yes.
It's visualized, and the scarlet cord that was let down.
Right.
And that whole story, and it gives a reality to Rahab that you never really sensed before that time. Of course, Rahab then was elevated as a person of faith in the history of the Bible. She's actually in the messianic line as given in Matthew.
The reason why this is so important, I believe, because I have children, I have 6 grandchildren now, and the question of, is this historical? The stories of, they're prophetic. There was prophecies that were given, and we've looked at that. The prophecy to Abraham about the story of the Exodus was prophetic. And you look at these questions and you start to ask, did they happen? And your children are going to ask, did they happen? Your grandchildren are going to say, come on, Papa, did this really happen? And they believe it for a while, and then they go to school and some kid says, well, you believe that, But that's why I think that this is significant, because it's actually a great shareable tool for your family and for your friends who are doubters. There are patterns of evidence, and they are so strong that it's going to be pretty hard for them not to see that there's something that happened. It really is testifying.
Egyptian history clarified at last in this DVD set, Patterns of Evidence. And I have taken out the contents, and I'm going to open them up so that you can see what you get when you order this collector's edition set. You have the Blu-ray DVD and plus 3 other DVDs. Tell us about the 3 others.
Well, there's so much evidence that we felt that we needed to expand all of the 6 steps. So we have one disc that's expanding that, and this is up to almost 10 hours of additional information. We have another one that basically deals with digging deeper into the archaeology of the Bible. There's questions. I was going to just show you. There's a sheet that we give out here, and it has things like, is there a bias against the Bible's historical record? How much has been unearthed? They say that just a very little bit of has been. There's so much that's waiting to be unearthed. And then this one, questioning the ancient timeline, is another very important DVD. And then we've got a panel discussion with Gretchen Carlson from Fox News, with Anne Graham Lotz and Dennis Prager and Eric Metaxas and Father Jonathan Morris. An amazing discussion about what does this mean? What is the impact about this? So there's a whole series with, I got one here, How is the Exodus foundational to our faith? And Understanding Our Heritage with Pat Boone. So there's a lot of excellent pieces, but this also has a wall of time insert so that you can pull this out, you can look at the wall of time, and we also have the ancient map of the that basically gives you a context. So as you're sitting there and you're looking at this film, you're going to go, oh, now I understand. These are scenes from the film. that are going to be really, really helpful for you.
And by the way, in addition to that collector's edition set, which we're offering for $59.95, we have the book called Patterns of Evidence, but hardcover, beautiful, beautiful pictures on virtually every page in this book, $29.95, and lets you go at leisure through the story of the Exodus mystery and kind of see how it was developed and solved. So we have the book for $29.95, the collector's edition set for $59.95, and with every order, if you order, we'll send along a copy of The Prophecy Watcher, our monthly magazine. Just go to prophecywatchers.com, click the online bookstore, and you'll see how to order these wonderful, wonderful DVD sets, or the book, or both. Listen, it's important to me. And let's get to the important part now. Why is a study like this so important? Tim and I have talked about it, and we both agree that if history is correct, if you can depend on the Bible as history, and you can locate key elements in the historical progress of the Old Testament that actually are discoverable when you go out there with a spade and start digging. If all this is true, it expands your faith 100-fold. Suddenly, if you can depend on what's in the past, then the future is also dependable.
That's correct. And I think that's what I started to see, is that if you can't believe in the past and the events that happened, then what can you believe for today and in the future? Will God, be true to His Word? And the thing that I started to realize is people said there was no evidence for this. And you know what? That just wasn't true. And when I went out to ask that question, then I realized that, wait a minute, if I found out that it was true that there was evidence, I wanted to share it with others. And that's the reason why this is so important. We were able to create these products to share. They're very shareable because you're hearing from different sides. And I think that it's really important to be able to share. And what it does is it'll help your own faith and give you more confidence. Yeah. But you're going to have something now. You're going to have a new way to discuss the Bible with others.
And there's a point that I should make at this time, and that is that I think Tim was very brave in inviting experts who were not necessarily of his belief system. They were experts in archaeology, in various academic pursuits, who were not necessarily Bible believers, but they had a lot of information they could share. And I think that the fact that you provided both sides, both believers and unbelievers, and kind of interpolated their knowledge into your final conclusion is a good thing.
And that's the reason why it makes these products so shareable. Because if you've got family members that have been critical of a one-sided approach, now what you have is you've got a lot to think about.
You have,
and it gives you a lot to think about, and it's and at the end of the conclusion is that just so you can know that there is a pattern of evidence that matches the biblical narrative, the biblical story, and that's what I think is so encouraging about this series.
Author and filmmaker Timothy Mahoney, it's been a great pleasure talking with you, Tim.
It's great to be here, Gary.
And you need to apprise yourself of the information on patterns of evidence. I'm Gary Stearman. We're watching, so you keep watching too. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.